Okay, we are going to quickly move on to the next panel, the panel of power professionals. May I invite on stage the members of this esteemed panel. This will be moderated by Mr. Ashok Barat from Merck's Business Advisors. He's former MD and CEO of Forbes and Company Limited and past President, Bombay Chamber. Please welcome Mr. Barat. On the panel, I'd like to invite Mr. V.S. Parthasarthi, Group CFO, Mahindra & Mahindra. Dr. Raman Ramachandran, Chairman and MD, BASF. And Ms. Hansi Mehrotra, Founder at the Money Hands. Thank you, Mr. Barat. I'll lead the panel to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to keep it short and sweet, knowing that I'm not going to stop you from having your dinner and then leaving. There's rains outside, but let me just take this occasion to reminisce a little. And I was tempted to do so by the presence of both Ranjit and Devita. In fact, I got involved with Bombay Chamber the year Ranjit was the president. And I still remember Devita attending every managing committee meeting as a member of the committee. And that was the kind of a status that the YBF had and continues to have in the chamber. One of the comments that was made, and this is a slight digression, but nonetheless very relevant as you will see as we proceed through the evening. What has been the recipe of this chamber's success and existence for over 180 years? There are many things that one can talk about, but a strange thought came to me when I was having this conversation earlier this evening with some friends here. Many people would perceive it as a weakness, but the chamber suffers from what others may call a weakness, but I call it a strength. Singular lack of people willing to take credit for its success. Now, it is not driven by any pious selflessness. It is just the DNA. In fact, it is something that has grown over the years. People love to work for the chamber, not because what it gives to them or what they can talk about, but what, therefore, becomes a part of their DNA and personality. And today we are very privileged to have with us a very distinguished panelists. I know many of them personally, who have achieved the singular success of leadership in everything that they have done, not just because of the position that they hold or the education that they had or because of the function that they have in their organization, but because it is a part of their character, part of their personality, and a part of their demeanor. And that is what is most important for a leadership to demonstrate. And this is very important because today we are living in very interesting times. The entire concept of leadership is under severe cynicism and skepticism. Because we see people around us who are leaders, and this is not true of just politics. You know, I'm not talking about politics. It is about politics. It's about business, about art, culture, films, and their behavior and their conduct creates a very serious shadow of doubt over the whole idea of leadership. And this has grave ramifications, not just because it destroys control over our destiny, but also, and you know, I'm certainly a senior citizen, I can see there is a singular lack of role models in today's society for young people. And that could be a very dangerous trend. Most of us have been born and bred in an environment where we had a huge number of people to look up to. And you could pick and choose depending on what you wanted to be or what appealed to you most. Today, when I talk to youngsters, both in my organization and my children's friends, I find that they have a huge amount of skepticism about leadership. And this is a very dangerous trend. And therefore, this particular panel discussion, which is going to look at some of the tenets of leadership from a slightly different and I won't call it a dated, but certainly an aged point of view, it would be very useful to put that in perspective to the panel that we had before us. So this panel, as I said, comprises of people who have had great distinction in everything that they have done. They are role models themselves in the community that they live in the organization that they work for, in their alma maters. And therefore, it is not just distinguishment that makes this panel what it is, but also their very special achievements. So thank you very much, panelists, for joining us. I will just start by provoking the panelists, and I will leave it to them then to introduce themselves and to react or critique what I have got to say. As I was preparing for this particular panel, I said, let me try and define what leadership is. Now, I know that leadership cannot be defined. It's a very amorphous concept. It's like an elephant, a blind man touching an elephant. Everybody will see it from his or her own perspective. But from my own experience, I thought leadership is as follows. Leadership is the ability to drive and achieve desired outcomes through the endeavor of others without having to use the authority to do so. I mean, this is what I thought would be an appropriate starting point for getting the distinguished panelists to get off the ground. And I would start with you, Partha.
Yeah, let me use my kunji first. So.
It's out of syllabus.
Yeah. No, don't worry. I thought we'll make it a little bit more grounded. So I said, leadership is a wave. Yeah. So if I break up that word, leadership on W who walks the talk. Anybody who walks the talk immediately becomes somebody who follows him because he says and he means what he says. Yeah. And then you say, A is ability to bring people together. And that's because you create a vision. You create something which other wants to look at. And V is, of course, nobody will look at unless you have a great vision to go with it, whatever you want to do. And without results, nothing would matter because otherwise, say that you can have everything, but you need to have results as well. So E's end result has to be achieved. So if we are a wave, we will certainly become a leader. And as they say, Dulhan wahi jo piya man bhaaye, or leader wahi jo team ko pasand aaye. देखो आंखों में नमी और तालियों में कमी कभी नहीं होनी चाहिए तो बजा रहे तो जोर से बजा
So the question is okay sorry, so I should sort of take that time. Hi, my name is Hansi. I'm actually, when Pratham called me up and said, can you be part of this panel, I actually asked him, okay, who else is going to be on this panel? And I was given some names of these esteemed gentlemen. And I actually asked, well, why are you putting me on in the same league, the same category? Because I think I saw that there was a young people's panel with a 27-year-old who was just impressive. And then there are people who've achieved things. I reckon there should be a middle panel. The people with the midlife crisis, I think that's where I fit, okay? Not quite young enough, not quite old enough. Which leads me to, I guess, the leadership thing. The reason I still accept and I wanted to come and participate was, so my claim to fame, according to the CV, is that I actually left India doing a Bachelor of Arts degree by correspondence, went to Australia and established a career in finance. And I chose finance after I got there, and I had something that I wanted to do. So it's not something that my dad wanted me to become a doctor. But I chose finance because I had done some work or research on what finance did. And I actually, from that day onwards, from that first day in finance onwards, I wanted to do finance for good. And I started with becoming an advisor specializing in ethical investments. Today, 25 years later, I still do that, and I do it in different forms, but I still do that. As a 21-year-old, I actually managed to make it to a full-page article in the Financial Review in Australia, which is the equivalent of Economic Times here. And again, I've managed to keep that up. I'll explain a bit more a bit later, but the bit that I believe in leadership is they're people leaders, and I'm sure we'll hear more from them. And then they're thought leaders, and they're process leaders. I think, even though I was 21, I started with, I didn't intend to become a thought leader, it's just something I had a thought, and I started sharing it. And that kind of spread in the Australian industry. And because I was the odd one out, I keep dropping this, because I was the odd one out, I think, because I had the courage to stand up and make a point, perhaps also because I looked different, maybe because I was young and female and whatever, maybe, it stood out and it spread. So within, I put myself that within 3 years, I will make ethical investments, something that is understood in Australia. Within 5 years, pretty much the whole industry in Australia knew who I was and what I was standing for. Today, I've only been back 5 years in India, and to my amazement, I have a huge following on LinkedIn. And again, not something that I've tried, going out of my way to try. I just started I had a thought, and I started sharing it, and people started following it. So my point of this whole long-winded answer is that they are people leaders, and they are charismatic. I'm not one of them. I see myself more as a thought leader, just because I have the courage to have a thought and put it out there and be able to communicate that effectively. And if the idea is important, if it's impactful, if it is touching the human condition, amazingly, people just follow. So that's kind of what I've managed to do.
I think you made a very interesting point. I think that certainly calls for an applause, because it actually takes me to one question that often is leadership only about formal organizations or institutions? I think not. The other day, when there was so much of rains, and I was coming through a place, the Worli Naka, and there were a set of volunteers who were trying to organize the traffic. To my mind, in fact, as you said, that was the first thing that came to my mind, that is also leadership. The person who was, the 2 or 3 young men who were doing, not wearing a police uniform. I was not duty bound to hear them, or listen to them, or to follow them. They were far less educated than I was. They were not of the same economic status I was, but I followed them. That's what leadership is all about. So I think you have made a very interesting point, and I would take you on that in a while in a slightly different context, but over to you, Doc.
So I'm Raman, as you see in front here, and I head the BSF group of companies in South Asia. I've had a pretty checkered career. I mean, I started, doing research actually in Australia. That's where I got my PhD from. Did research in Africa, and then ended up in the US, Philippines, and did quite a number of diverse roles. And I'm actually not even a chemical engineer, but today I run a company with more than 1,500 chemical engineers and organic chemists. So why I say this is, I think a very important characteristic of a leader has to be the ability, the learnability quotient, and the ability to test and try out new things. My own favorite definition of leadership is, it's about people who are followed voluntarily because they take that group of people to places that those people will not go on themselves. So it's also about, a bit like what you talked about, going to new places and discovering new things and creating that vision to be able to do that, which is so compelling that people are willing to follow you.
But, I have a question for you, Doc.
Yeah.
You are the head of a very large global institution. And all organizations, even the young people that we met this evening, I'm sure that over a period of time, their organizations will also become large institutions. Now, there is a feeling that, once you grow to a certain size, an institution completely destroys and dampens inspiration. And because it destroys and dampens inspiration, it also starts affecting the kind of charisma that leadership is all is also about, that people associate leadership with charisma. How does BASF and you in particular handle that?
Yeah. So I don't necessarily believe that leadership can be directly correlated with charisma, particularly in organizations like ours, which is a huge knowledge-based organization, which is highly driven by technology, highly driven by research. I think charisma does only go to a certain extent. But to your point, I think one of my big inspiration in terms of leadership is Sumantra Gaushal, the famous Indian professor who taught in London School of Business and INSEAD. And I've, right from my early age, had been reading up on this, and that's what gave me the inspiration to really aspire for this people leadership. And one of the things he talks about is the organizational energy. How do you create a positive organizational energy? And he has this very famous speech called The Smell of the Place, where he compares the smell of an organization either as the smell in Calcutta in the month of June in summer, or in the forests of Fontainebleau outside of the INSEAD College in France. And the Fontainebleau in spring is all about energy when you walk into that forest. And people once you get into that place, you feel like singing and you feel like running. Whereas, of course, in summer in Calcutta, you can neither sing nor you can even walk. So that's the contrast. And he says that organizations are also, there is a smell about organizations. And it can either be smell of Calcutta in summer or the smell of Fontainebleau in spring. And I think I believe in that. And it is about creating the pillars on which this is created: trust, the ability to stretch, or the environment in which people stretch themselves. And this can be created. And that is what really has brought me back to this organization. And it is really about creating that very open, trustful environment where the relationship between the organization and the individual or the employee is not based purely on contract, but is based on a certain level of commitment and certain level of passion, and more importantly, the purpose that they see for the organization.
Thank you, Doc. In fact, you also, in your leadership role, have a huge responsibility in a global corporation to be the communicator of core values. Your entire role, your leadership responsibility is built around values, ethics, propriety, control, process. How do you do this communication? How do you successfully communicate in diverse languages, diverse kind of people, different levels of education, different agendas? How do you inspire them?
Yeah, I wish I could say, I just stand up and do a speech and it happens. So, and I certainly don't do it. Yeah, but it's an organization, and this is a very fundamental question which each organization need to ask. Just let's first say, we had this big debate when we started. We are not a conglomerate. Now, this debate goes on in the organization just to make and say, what are we? We are a federation. What's the big difference? Federation is made up of leaders who manage their own ships. Don't think of yourself all in a big ship together. Think of yourself as small ships each. And they are in the sea, and the only thing which binds you is core values. So therefore, we have 360 small boats or ships, and managed by 360 leaders. So Partha is only one of them, is not the leader. And therefore, you are all bound by core values. So the moment you say that, then there is 360 responsible, and they in turn create their subships. So
Partha, I know you well. You're being more modest than you need to be.
Yeah.
You are the string in a thread of pearls, the thread in a string of pearls. How do you play that role of that thread?
So this is the broader one, and I'm still going to duck what he is asking. You all will allow me to do it, right? I've got the mic as well. Okay. So broadly, the second thing is just think about what initially when the first Mr. Keshav Mahindra was there, and this was a small organization. It was possible for them to kind of preach this, talk about it, walk the talk, and do it. And when the organization become big, then we actually had somebody do a DNA test. and say, what is this organization all about? And they came up with three themes, which says, this is an organization which accepts no limit, which drives positive change and alternative thinking. So this is the culture, this is the framework of the organization. And when we had the core values, I'll just relate a small incident, which says we had 6 or 7 core values which we put out on a sheet. And then Mr. Anand Mahindra went around asking, is this a core value? And everybody said only 2 are core values, that's what we practice, that's what we do. The other 4 are good on paper, but I don't think we follow it. So we said we don't have 6, 7 core values, we have only 2. And we put the rest as evolving values. It took us 7 years to get the vote of the entire organization to say we all follow it. And that's the kind of tales that we do. So daily now, every day on the RISE philosophy, a book gets issued every month. And it talks about the story of following core values at each level. My job, if at all, is to enable this flow of talk to happen. So I shouldn't talk about the 5'6" that I am.
Thank you so much. But you know, it's a very interesting coincidence that the 3 things that he first spoke about are the same things that inspired Hansi to do what she has done. Very, very, I was just said, I thought that, there was some kind of a private conversation that must have happened before this, so that it just worked out well. But I will ask you, who inspired you, Hansi, to do what you did? Because you chose not to walk the trodden path in a different country and persevere despite the fact that I'm sure you would have had a lot of disappointments because you were doing something completely new and innovative. Who inspired you in the first place, and how did you keep going?
Actually, it's not as much as who. Situations just happened. So I'd say the first few years of your life is not your making. You are a outcome of your genetic lottery, right? Who you're born to, what parents you're born to, what country you're born. I think all of that is taken for granted. When in the earlier panel I heard Harvard and London and stuff, these are business schools that I wanted to go to, but I never could. Like I said, I did my BA by correspondence, cost me all of 400 rupees. And then landed in Australia and basically waited at tables. That's how I start my career. Interestingly, it was Harshit Mehta appearing on the cover of Business India that got me to say, okay, I want to be a stockbroker. But then when I turned up to this first finance class and I walked up to the teacher and I said, okay, I want to be a stockbroker, except I'm not really sure what they do. They look kind of interesting. And he just had a good laugh and said, come to the office and I'll give you some tips. So I kind of really then studied. Back then there was no internet, right? So I actually studied and spoke to anyone I could speak to and just understood what the finance field was about and got in. And like I said, straight away realized what was wrong with the finance field. I've spent the next 25 years then trying to fix that, and I'm still kind of on that journey. I did it first with a very small company. So let me just backtrack. So I did a 2-year diploma in finance, managed to get through distinctions and all that. And then I wrote a letter to the CEOs of 10 companies in Australia who were the big in their fields. And said, I'm this 23-year-old now, and I finished this course, and I've got distinctions, and I will be CEO of your company. I just kind of need to figure out whether it's worth it or not. So can you spare me half an hour of your time and give me some advice? I actually, until last year, when I wrote the story on LinkedIn, I thought only 1 got back. Actually, 2 other people who are on my LinkedIn today wrote back and said, well, actually, you're forgetting us. We said yes. So 3 out of the 10 actually wrote back and gave me the coffee meeting, which is just amazing. So, and then obviously life went from there. I then ended up taking the job with the one person who I thought was had the most integrity. And lucky for me, I've only had 2 jobs in my life, and both of them have been for these older men who probably my father's age, maybe a bit older. Interestingly, both were not charismatic person at all. They were both, one was an economist and the other one, actually both were economists. Second one turned out to be the Secretary of the Treasury, the Australian Federal Treasury. So both people were very inspiring in what they had achieved. And hence my thing about, I just simply wanted to be like them. So they had the integrity to open doors. When I stuffed up, for example, we were in the research field. So we would give ratings to mutual funds and all kinds of funds. And there were times that I would be honest enough to write down what I thought, not realizing the consequences. And then invariably some person would call up my boss and say, okay, you know, this young girl of yours has written this research report, that can't be, we'll sue you. My boss at the time would simply, very calmly, and this one time I remember, he would say, did you call me in and say, did you do your homework? Of course you did, right? I said, yeah, of course I did. Then he would call them back and say, well, I can't fight if you sue us, but what I'll do is I'll take the report out and put a blank page in between where the report is meant to be and say, we can't publish the report because the company is threatening to sue us. And obviously that would mean that they would turn around and say, well, actually that publicity would be worse than the rating that you would give us. The point though was, he completely backed what we had to say. So once he had trained us, it was like, I'm backing you no matter what happens, no matter who threatens to sue us, we will back you. And that has happened to me time and time again. In the last 25 years, I've done enough research reports that have resulted in those sort of threats. And yeah, it's been, so these two bosses of mine would be definitely one inspiring. And more recently, I'd say, having figured this out on my own, when I was preparing for a TEDx talk last year, and I did a search on the most watched TED Talks, and one of them was Simon Sinek. And I thought that was quite well articulated. That was what kept me going, not sort of knowing that that's how he put it, but the why of what you do needs to be there. So first the why, then the how, and then the what. My why has not changed in the last 25 years. And so these two people gave me the courage to say, okay, it can be done the right way if you keep going. But then, in the end, you have to figure out by yourself.
Thanks. In fact, you made a number of points, but I will just pick on one of them and toss it to Raman. In fact, I never thought of it this way. In fact, and I'm going to think about it as I drive back home, that, it's not only inspiration that makes you, come to terms with what you wish to be, but it could also be a reaction. And seeing Harshad Mehta on the cover, and we are talking about him in this hall, is certainly a reaction. And the second thing that you also said was that sometimes if you're determined to be where you are, you can even be audacious. Raman, you hire leaders, you groom leaders, you choose leaders. How would you react to an audacious young man aspiring to be a leadership position?
Not very well. Because
I asked you deliberately because, you come across as a very serious person.
Yeah. No, I believe that the mark of a good leader, there are three characteristics. You need to have humility, you need to have curiosity, and you need to have veracity. You need to be authentic. And the other thing is when some of us, probably were also audacious and overconfident at some stage of our lives, at the peak of our success, so to speak. But if you have read the book Halo Effect, you also know that those successes don't always remain. There is so many variables that determine the success in a business world that if you really are humble, you will realize that you probably had 30 to 40% contribution to that. Yeah? So I don't necessarily, but it's not that I don't have such people in my team. I think what I try to do is, because I am also of late a strong believer that if you have a team, you need to make sure that that team has different archetypes of people in it. right? And very often we tend to hire people who look like ourselves, who behave like ourselves. Then you have the the herd mentality, and this is also a sure way to ruin your business. So I think it's important to have some of these very strong-willed people who drive things, but you cannot have a team which is composed entirely of the drivers, nor can you have a team of people which is composed entirely of integrators. So you need a balance. Yes, I encourage that, but I also spend a lot of time coaching such people to moderate the conversation, moderate the tone that they have, but not lose the energy and not lose the kind of focus to get things done. I don't know whether that answers the question.
In our society, we tend to put leaders on a pedestal. And that's a part of our social trait. And I don't think that happens so much in the West. But we will have to live with it till we actually reach a point where we tend to look at our leaders as more humans than gods as they appear to be. But since you are there right at the top, what is it one thing that can derail a leader or make him or her fall off the pedestal?
I think the one thing is taking yourself too seriously, and also assuming that that whole organization or whatever happens in that organization depends on you. In fact, if you come to my room, you will see on my whiteboard a statement which is called Rule Number 6. And that, I don't know how many of you have heard of the Rule Number 6 story. This actually comes out from the talk of a gentleman by name Ben Zander, who is actually the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. Ben Zander is also a great leadership coach and educator. And one of the things that he talks about is the story of the Rule Number 6, where he talks about two prime ministers who are having a conversation. And as they were talking, there is a young gentleman, walks in, completely flustered and kind of very anxious and says, Prime Minister, Prime Minister. And then the Prime Minister of the resident country says, Patrick, remember Rule Number 6. And of course, Patrick quietens down, leaves the papers, and then leaves. 5 minutes later, another young lady walks in, very similarly, very aggravated, comes in, and Prime Minister again says, Susan, remember Rule Number 6. And Susan, of course, becomes quietened down, leaves the paper, and then walks out. And 5 minutes later, another person walks in, similarly, very anxious, etc. And the other prime minister, visiting country's prime minister, says, this is wonderful, every time these people come in, obviously there is something very important, and you tell them Rule Number 6, and they all, kind of become gentle and walk out. So what is this Rule Number 6? And Prime Minister of the resident country says, it's very simple. It just says, don't take yourself so bloody serious. And then the visiting country's prime minister, that's wonderful, but what are the other rules? And he said, there are no other rules. And I think that's the problem sometimes. I think if you start taking yourselves too seriously, and you rightly said that, I think in the Indian context, there is a lot of stuff that happens. There is tremendous amount of psychophancy. There is tremendous amount of subservient body language that people tend to use in front of a leader. And all of this can very soon get into your head when you might actually start off being a fairly humble person when you came into the job, but very soon you might end up being that person who says, shit, this whole place runs because of me. And I think you need to guard yourself on a daily basis against that. And actually, I also uploaded a recent blog that I wrote internally on my LinkedIn, where I specifically talk about frequently when I see, even in business classes, people sitting and the very subservient body language and the sir and the whole tone and at the highest levels happening. And I think this is really not good. And this needs to change. And otherwise we will not have, we will not make the country, as, we heard in the inaugural speech, great. We might individually become great, but not the country.
Thanks. The last two future-looking questions before we throw it open to the audience. Let me start with you, Partha. How do you breed more leaders?
it is a very interesting question. You have all the logical answers of having a great talent management program, and we do. Okay. You also have. I run a scheme called a CFO Plus Track, where I say, don't just stop at being CFO, be CEOs, and we run this program. But it is how you look at people. Okay. Let me give you an example. My job before becoming Group CFO was being CEO for all business outside India. So when I came in, I sat the people together and I said, hey, what I want to do is I want in 1 quarter to achieve the numbers, 1 year to, turn around this entire and make global as couple of domestic, and 10 years I want to have 3 MDs from this room that we are having today. So 3 of my people should be MDs. So eventually 5 became, by the time I left, which was only 4 years, to become the group CFO. So one of the things that you say, how much you believe in your people. Just to give another example is that I joined M&M. Okay, I was in MX, Modi Xerox, this is M&M, and I keep joking, 1M to 2M, and the only company now who can hire is 3M. Okay, so, but that apart, I came in and I was head of organizational transformation. Transform Tractor to be global #1. So, and I said, I want only people from within the company. So I come in as a senior person, and I only selected 1 guy from each department. And almost the joke going around the office was, Thakur ne Fauj banai hai. Okay. So, and I just turned and said, you're the best people there are, and we are going to help this organizational transfer to be a global MNC. We became in 6 years world #1. Many of them are leaders of their own right in the organization, but before we came into the department, the average grade was average. So I think it's the way you look at them. If it is like ice hockey, you need to see where they can go, and if you keep concentrating on that and you say you're the best, and I think they more often than not prove us right. I've never had an occasion where any team has let me down. I may have let them down. My team has never let me down.
That's a very awesome and awesomely humble statement to make. Hazi, the last one. This is an audience of young people who are seeking inspiration from you. What is the one piece of advice that you would like to leave for them?
For me?
Yes.
I'm young myself. What? I don't know. I think from my own life, I'd say that you have to believe that. I think there was this major fear when I entered the industry that I didn't know anything, and that how all my bosses and senior people knew what they were doing. And I would be really sort of apprehensive, especially I work for a small company. I managed to get quite a bit of experience, and as I said, my boss stood by me. I built a product which became quite industry leading. Mercer, this very big company, tries to buy it. First I kept saying, no, go away. I don't want to talk to you. I had this arrogance. But then eventually they said, come give us a chance. I spent 10 years inside, and I realized that actually they weren't that much better than what we were doing anyway. And only having spent 10 years there and then sort of got experience all around the world, did I have the confidence to do what I'm doing today. I kind of left that job and I'm doing it. So a couple of things. One is you think that other big companies and other very senior people know what they're doing. It's only when you actually go and work with them do you realize actually they don't. Okay, the whole global financial crisis is proof of the fact that a lot of people did not know what they were doing. So when you see something wrong happening around you, I think you should do something about it. You don't assume that actually there are a lot of other smart people out there. Let me not raise my hand, I look stupid. No, you don't look stupid. You go and ask the question, ask somebody the question of why this is being done this way if you see something wrong. That's the first thing. And then, yeah, I guess that's the biggest thing for me. I find that when I hired very young people, 20-year-olds, they went along with what I had to say. And it's like, no, question me. I give you full permission to question me. If I'm doing something stupid or wrong, please question me. So that would be the one thing I'd say.
That's. We will take 2 questions. So, can someone give the mic there? Just introduce yourself and you can ask any of the panelists.
Hi, my name is Ishan Mahapatra. You started off the panel, first of all, thank you very much for your time and words. You started off the panel saying that there's a great deal of essentially cynicism by young people towards their leaders and role models. I wonder if you've given any thought to how you could work to counter that.
So if I got your question right, that how do we overcome the cynicism? Is that?
Yes.
Okay. Should I go? Okay. Cynicism, to my mind, is also a state of mind. If you look at your own self, there is not everything that is perfect about you. And over a period of time, you learn to accept what you are. The same is true of your family. If you're married, it's a healthy understanding between a pair of people. If you have got grown-up children, it's again a healthy understanding with them because they come from a very different generation. So cynicism springs from your own lack of acceptance of imperfection. Having said that, how do you use it positively? One is to crib about it. The second option, which is a slightly better option, is to make people known, publicize what is wrong, and hope that people will get galvanized into action by seeing the logic of your argument. And the third one, which is what Hansi said, if you feel strongly about something, do something about it. But if you let cynicism start eating you from within, it will corrode you like an acid. And I'm sure that if you have, you don't have to be cynical about leadership. You can be even cynical about your children. You can be even cynical about the person who helps you in your house. You can be cynical about the person who drives you around. Because all of them will come in for imperfections. As a society, we have become so impatient and so my way or highway that we have become cynical about everything. And leadership is a very easy target because they're visible, they're all in the face, whether it's your boss or whether it is even your building society secretary. Can you for a moment imagine what a thankless task it is to be the secretary of a society? Are you willing to take it on? The moment you say, somebody says, okay, fine, if you feel so strongly about it, why don't you become the secretary? You'll immediately say, oh, I've got, I'm due for a promotion and I've got a lot of work to do. You will never take it on. So I think it is using your power of anger constructively. In fact, a lot of people have, I've heard about, people say that Gandhiji was a very peaceful man. Was he an angry man? Of course he was an angry man. He was the most angry man. If he had not felt angered and molested when he was thrown out of the train, nothing would have happened. But he chose to use his anger for doing something about it rather than just cribbing and complaining. So that's what it is.
Just a quick comment. Cynicism is because people are not walking the talk. Yeah, so we can blame them. The other way is each one of this in the room is a leader. So if you can think about walking the talk and inspiring someone around us, then actually the society will become an admiration society rather than a cynical society. And I think the change begins with us.
Hello. Hello, sir. Thank you. Thank to the entire organizer of this forum in setting as a leaders. My question is that years back when India won the World Cup, Kapil Dev was asked a question Sir, what was the reason for this success? Many of us will recapitulate those days of Zimbabwe not out 175, as well as a catch in the final against Vivian Richards, which was the turning point. Kapil Dev said, one of the reasons for success in the World Cup is fear of failure. My question is that is a person becomes leader because of the fear of failure, or is something that emanates from the innermost recesses of that individual? Number one. Number two, is parents has got any role to play in leaders? I mean to say, if we have to analyze entire aspect, can we say parents has got a pivotal role to play in so far as the leaders is concerned? These are two questions, sir.
So, if I'm not, fear of failure, yeah. I'm not totally convinced that fear of failure really helps, because fear often paralyzes people. Yeah? I would rather take leadership on the more positive side, and that's why this definition of, going places where you don't dare to go on your own, and hence people follow you. I think that comes out of a compelling positive vision of wanting to change, and it is not coming out of a fear of failure. Yeah? So that's my take on this. The second one, do parents play a role? I think absolutely. If you're brought up, not being told all the time what to do, and being given the independence to decide certain things on your own. If you're brought up, by parents who appreciate the effort that you have taken rather than the inherent or innate talent that you have, I think you become much more prone to become a better leader than if somebody is just telling you that you are so intelligent, you are so talented. And I think that's the belief system that I grew up with. Yeah.
Okay. So just to, will you? Okay. So one about fear of failure. It's like a half glass full. So any time when you have, something in the stomach when you stand up to give a speech, or the fact of the matter that I will forget something, so can I have something to prop up even on the leadership questions? So that's constructive thing that drives you for positive change is great. Any fear of failure which paralyzes you is absolutely, so stress, as long as it moves you to higher performance, is great. Below that, it's not great. So fear of failure per se, therefore I agree, but some fear is important because it stills you into motion. Yeah, if you are stuck. So the second one about the home and the family atmosphere is the greatest learning school that we will ever encounter. And we all will agree to that. And we'll draw many lessons. If I take 10 top lessons, 5 of them would have come in my childhood, in around my home strength, before I even entered corporate world. And therefore, that cannot be undermined as a building block of leadership. Sometimes you also get, it's like practice makes a man perfect, but imperfect practice makes a man perfectly imperfect. So sometimes in early childhood, we get many things instilled in us, discipline, respect elders, that stops us from questioning. So those are the kind of things which we have to kind of reflect and change, because otherwise we will always be making everybody God. We have to think of us as equals. Some are better than equal and have a bigger job to do. Respect. Don't bow down. Yeah. So that's I think what I would say.
Thank you very much, all of you. In fact, as I said right at the beginning, that you will have a group of panelists who you would learn to take inspiration from. In fact, I learned a lot of new things today. And it's never too late to learn. So thank you, YBF. Thank you, Bombay Chamber, for giving us this opportunity. And have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bharat and respected panel members. It was truly not just inspiring, enlightening, very remarkable takeaways, I'd say, not just with your words, but also with your demeanor. So much to learn and so much for all of us to grow. So thank you very much. May I now request Mr. Bharat to give the mementos to the respected panel members. So, Mr. Partha Sarthi. Chalo, let's do what sir says. Ms. Hansi Mehrotra. And Dr. Ramachandran. May I now request Mr. Vijay Srirangan, Director General, Bombay Chamber, to kindly come on stage and give the memento to Mr. Ashok Barat. We're also going to request a photo op, so please stay on. Ashit. Amit.
He is the inspiration behind YBF.
Yes. So हम आगे आना चाहते हैं? अच्छा ठीक है. हाँ. Thank you. अच्छा फिर से बोलना पड़ेगा. अपने कर कमलों को कष्ट दीजिए और सन्नाटे को नष्ट कीजिए.
Thank you once again, everyone, for joining us at the Decoding Leadership Conclave. We hope you've had several takeaways, several reinforcements. And now it's time for networking and dinner. Before we head out, can we just have a vote of thanks by Mr. Vijay Srirangan, please?
I am going to take 3 more minutes of your time, so please bear with me. First, the first minute, formal vote of thanks. Bombay Chamber would like to thank the Bombay Stock Exchange, the event partners, the sponsors, the speakers, the participants, my YBF colleagues, Bombay Chamber of Commerce colleagues as well. Thank you very much, and all the participants. The second is 1 minute of humor, and I'd like to take some liberties with my colleagues at the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and its chairman, Shri Ashit Kampani. The humor is in the form of 4 lines, and the lines go this way. My apologies to the people concerned. Bombay Chamber of Commerce is known by the companies it keeps. The Young Bombay Forum is known by the company it keeps. The final minute is on another set of lines, which I call takeaway. And the lines read like this. While a leader may be born, he or she can be made. This is what the YBF seeks to aid. Lessons from such leaders will never fade. Participants can use this for their own upgrade. I must thank the speakers for pointers that they herein made. Thank you very much and good night.